Hi, welcome to Up Your Nerd Cred. Did you used to know everything that was happening in the Marvel and DC universes? Did finding out that some superheroes are from Marvel and some are from DC blow your mind? Has keeping track of everything happening there, and then realizing we're only talking about the comics universes, not the cinematic ones, and the different universes with their own multiversal crises have gotten a little bit out of hand? Well, don't worry. Up Your Nerd Cred is here to talk about the gods cosplaying as men, the men cosplaying as gods, and how much the cinematic universes are really leaving out. At the end of each episode, you'll hopefully know a little bit more than you did and can up your nerd cred. I'm your casual nerd host, CiCi. I'm very proud of my plan ahead. If I just keep a spare pair of pants and underpants in my bag when I go to pick up my kid, then I can immediately replace them if there's a wardrobe issue, right? I have successfully done this exactly once, and my ADHD has challenge accepted me kind of hard. Speaking of challenge accepted, though, our guest is someone who I've known for what, 16, 17 years? We don't,
2009. Yeah.
we don't need to do the math. But what we do need to do is introduce, one of my closest friends who is at a pretty solid nerd level. It's okay to call yourself an expert, okay? AM pretends that he's not on a regular basis, but actually, again, I've also told him that he's forgotten more than Kevin Feige actually knows. And realistically speaking, I'm pretty sure that you're not too far removed.
What about I have my own hyperfixations and they have changed a lot over the years?
Okay, well, how about that? So, I would like to introduce to you our friend, Matthew. So, you want to tell people who you are?
So like she said, my name is Matthew. I'm definitely a big old philosophy nerd. I went to school for philosophy. I was really interested in questions of power and what it means to be human at all. And I find that there's a lot of that in just general, sort of with nerd coded media a lot of the times.
Really? This feels like a huge shock and surprise.
I know.
Um,
When you have literal aliens, it makes it a lot easier to ask what it is to be human.
I mean, there's literal aliens, and then there's the whole thing of just like, hey, we're all human, and human is just, we're gonna call it the default, and anyone who is non-human, aka has the X gene, we gonna fight you. But podcast listeners, you're not here for me talking about fighting people with the X gene, all right? I want to make sure that we are clear that just because we are clarifying the format doesn't mean that we are actually going to skip out on the format altogether, right? Of course, right. So, podcast listeners, what are we nerding out about this week? Now, just a reminder, you can nerd out about all kinds of things, okay? It doesn't just have to be heroes and villains. Misty Copeland just had a hip replacement, right? But you know that she was so psyched to have ballet have a front and center moment at the Oscars. Also, if you were surprised that Mark Wayne Mullen's confirmation hearing has had yelling, then I feel like the fact that it was him and Rand Paul tussling about some comment Mark Wayne made years ago is the reason that they're tussling. So, you can nerd out about all kinds of things. Let's start with our guest. Matthew, what are you nerding out about?
Well, as you know, since I'm visiting you, we had a few people come in together, and so we finally got a
Spring break!
chance
Mhm.
to discuss the newest Dresden Files novel that came out, 12 Months. And there were four of us, and CiCi was kind of just watching.
I was so glad that you guys were all having a good time, but I have no idea. Put it to you this way. If you are a Dresden Files fan, then you will understand exactly what it is when I'm saying that the only thing that I know about the series is how much Harry loves his hat. Beyond that, though, what was it like just being able to sit there and talk about it just
It was
completely?
nice. It's one of those good reminders of why your friends are your friends. You have similar interests that you get to talk about, and you get to really bond over, and you get to, talk about your crazier and crazier fan theories.
Yeah, I would like to point out the fact that there was an active harassment in which you made sure that husband guy knew very specifically that he had an assignment of figuring out who it was who was going to betray somebody by the end of the series. And let me tell you, I have no idea who anybody is, but while I'm sitting there, like, talking about things that, like, it's difficult to explain, I will also say that explaining the various consanguinities of, like, the people in my life would take too long. But let me tell you what I'm nerding out about, okay? I have had more auntie time in the past week and a half than I have had in person with both of my nibblings, all right? They're usually states away, right? But their spring breaks all lined up in a way that, like, I could actually see one nibbling and then the other in quick succession. So now, husband guy has mentioned how happy he is to get to see me be in auntie mode, which is great because I have definitely been wanting to do it for ages. I've actually moved so much that spam callers are very rarely actually using the area code of where I actually am. The minor downside to this is that, well, I mean, like, you have nibblings, right? So, like, you're familiar with the part where, like, you give them like $5 here, $20 there, right? It's one of those things that, like, even that is completely separate from whatever you're giving them for birthdays and graduations and stuff like that. But to a certain extent, they can hit you up for cash if they need to for whatever reason, right?
Right.
So I haven't really been able to spend things the way that I would like to. And so I built up something of an auntie budget. And I've been using it while they're here. So I gave one nibbling a $300 budget at a store that we both like. The problem is that I used both the auntie budget and the CiCi budget, both on the same transaction, and I nearly gave that child a heart attack. Now, listeners, I did in fact make a note of the final cost to husband guy so that he could, keep track of everything for accounting purposes, mostly because I'm trying not to give him a heart attack later too. Anyway, what matters is that my babies are bushy like auntie.
It's not untrue.
Yeah, yeah, I do this. So, we're going to take a quick break for us to plot on the next surprise that we can do because we have a shared nibbling, and we'll be right back to Up Your Nerd Cred. Welcome back. So, podcast listeners, I like to tease our guests about how pretty much wherever he goes, people flock to him as their leader, right? His President Loki was able to secure a vote at Disneyland without even speaking. Actually, he was just like, oh no, I actually refuse to speak at this exact second. And I'm just like, great, I'm going to engage with this person for you. And that's it's so presidential for you to have a spokesperson, actually.
I did say one thing eventually.
That's true. But,
At the very end, I said, after they volunteered to give me their vote, their life, and everything after, I said I would like that.
well, see, that's the thing. Like, you didn't even have to say anything first. And I just was just like, I'm here to negotiate, right? Okay. But I s he is just that cool, okay? Somehow or other, I have very, very cool friends who do very, very cool things, and I'm just like, "I'm just a weird mom." Anyway, that's not what we're talking about, right? What he and I were actually talking about, though, is do you remember the scene in the, first Black Panther movie, right? Where T'Challa's on the ancestral plane, he's trying to, like, tell his dad, like, like, "I wanna be like you, I wanna be a good king." And T'Chaka, like, really stops short and is just like, hi, fun fact. So you are a good man, and it is difficult for a good man to be a good king. And, like, Matt had a number of thoughts about that conceit. And a large part of it, too, is the way that T'Challa responded to it later is because he's a millennial, and millennials as a group, especially, as things have continued on, we've had plenty of good, like, people who are, like, genuinely good kings and genuinely good leaders in our media. So, Matt, can you give us, like, kind of an idea of, like, the baseline of your theory of what it is that you're trying to, like, um
I'm really more of the opinion rather than the necessity of power, meaning you have to always make terrible choices. That some moments occasionally, especially in fiction, leadership decisions can be framed in a way artificially where you have to make just bad decisions. But more realistically, you could make good decisions. They just wouldn't necessarily help you out.
So wait, is this why the Kobayashi Maru is impossible, or is that like a completely different like kind of vibe?
Kind of. I mean, it's made impossible so that a leader has to face failure eventually,
Right.
because you won't grow as a person if you never fail.
Okay.
And then when you get to the point where you do fail and don't expect it, you kind of freeze up.
Okay.
So there is no good choice for the Kobayashi Maru except for cheating.
We're not talking about what Jimmy did, okay? Jimmy is doing things, but okay, let's talk about like some actually honorable people then who are like, would facing their own version of Kobayashi Maru. Like what about like Ned Stark or whatever?
Perfect example. Think about how shocking the end of season one is because the man who you think is going to be the hero because he's the one who's making all the seemingly honorable choices is suddenly, well, makes too honorable a choice. And
To be fair, it would have been a
can I
bit.
spoil this one?
I was gonna. You could absolutely spoil this. I'm just gonna say, like, I think that the directors of the show spoiled it by casting Sean Bean as Ned Stark because, like, if that man survives like a season or like a movie, then something has gone terribly wrong. Anyway, that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about though is like what's happening in season 1 of Game of Thrones, how like who we're following suddenly gets shifted.
Right. So you pretty soon get shown, especially in Game of Thrones, that being a good leader and being a good person are really not compatible. The people who are doing the best are your Littlefingers and your Varys, these people who are despicable and make bad choices, even though they claim Varys is not a villain. I had doubts.
I think that Varys and Littlefinger are similarly villainous. The difference is that Varys is not interested in being the main, like, known wielder of power, whereas Littlefinger wants to be, like, at least, if not necessarily, like, the official wielder of power, the known wielder of power. And I think that might be the two different things there. But
But so
neither of
that's
them are someone who that we like really should look up to, and neither of them have had positive like endings so far in the series, right?
right.
So continuing on.
But on the opposite of the spectrum, you have just your Saturday morning cartoon, your golden age of comics, where being good and king and being an effective leader are one and the same. So that's a bit naive for most people because
Mm,
it's honestly impossible to believe you can always have integrity and be effective. And I think those are slightly better words for I think the concepts we're getting at.
yeah.
So I think that a lot of heroes of like science fiction and leaders in fantasy often reject the purely Machiavellian, it's choose yourself always or you're going to die.
Mm.
And I think we've seen a lot of those leaders in the media we consumed growing up.
I will say that there are absolutely arguments that a lot of folks have been having online for the last, I'd say, probably 2 years at this point, where there's a certain amount of it. Like, again, like what is like making the correct choice and what is the most effective choice, right? We've had that in our elections, but how are we able to like sit there and formulate who it is fitting the role of being a genuinely good person and a genuinely good leader, right? Like who are we defining as having like both of these traits?
Well, I think there's going to be two categories.
Mm-hmm.
Your first one is your one who's always good.
Mm-hmm.
Your people like Buffy, who you know they're a hero. They're going to make the hard choice no matter what.
Yeah.
And then I think you have a different category, which are people who you initially see them making mistakes and then slowly get better as either leaders or as decent human beings with their own personal integrity over time.
Okay. So to a certain extent, it feels like you can be like the incorruptible pure pureness that Sailor Moon is, or you can be, which, is a very specific genre thing all in and of itself, because podcast listeners, we have made it very clear. I am a Sailor Moon girly, okay? For, like if Sailor Moon has no fans, that means that something desperate has happened to me, okay? But her her whole thing is like her entire power source is because she has this incorruptible pure pureness. Like she is super good. She is so good. And I promise you, I'm not teasing you about this forever. We will have a Sailor Moon episode, but other people who do not have the same benefit of this incorruptible pure pureness are then facing the fact that they have to make these
Difficult choice.
choices while also being a good person and maintaining this integrity, which, um, did your mom do the whole thing of just like integrity is what you do when nobody's looking? Because my mom loved that. Podcast listeners, my mom loved it so much, which is
My
fine.
mom was more of the you were dumb enough to get caught. You could face the consequences.
Oh, and see, that's why one of us is just like, well, let me just not make this mistake. And the other one is just like, what if we make the mistake correctly. So, like, who are a couple of like the fictional people that we're talking about as being like a good leader and a good person? Like, who are we like really actually defining as being Ben?
I think the single best example of both is Captain Picard from The Next Generation. Because Patrick Stewart played him, he's probably one of the most mainstream known of these kind of figures.
All right, let's make a general like kind of like idea of like who it is that we're talking about overall, because I want to make sure that like as we're talking about the individual people, I want to make sure that we're like being on the same page. Just like who are we? Because Captain Picard is a very specific individual, and I want to make sure that your definition of a good man or yeah, a good person and a good leader is not like getting held like within like the whole. It's only within this and blah blah blah. So
Right.
who all are we talking about?
I would also name Ambassador Delenn from Babylon 5. I think she's starting to fall a little more into your category of person who's learning how to be better as they go.
I'm a fan of this.
If we want like archetypal version of the person who failed and has to work better, it's truly like a villain who turns.
Mhm.
Our girl from Buffy, Faith.
I love Faith.
Gotta have faith.
Yeah, we're gonna keep moving. Anybody else that you want to
And
bring up?
then I want to do a like, slightly more controversial one. Lady Jessica from Dune, especially with Dune being everywhere right now. I think she's
Uh,
an interesting one to examine.
oh yeah. Okay, so let's podcast listeners. I am very excited to delve into each of these people because all of them have their own version of what I consider to be a bit of craziness. Again, there's some of this that we talked about beforehand. I think each of these people are all crazy in many ways, but I'm willing to be proven wrong. So, it I'm aware that most people are aware of who Captain Picard is. There's plenty of
Especially
people.
on this podcast.
You better be. If you were so confused about who Captain Picard is, like you need to go all the way back to when Weird Al had the whole white and nerdy song on like 3 albums back or something. Get it together. But the important part that we're talking about with the Captain Picard aspect of it is just like he is how do we manage to keep Picard from being a bit of a Gary Stew, right? Like there's a lot of stuff that we have with how cool actually hang on. You know what, podcast listeners? Let's go ahead and cycle back to formally introducing who it is that we're talking about, right? Because one of the things that we have established over the course of times is that like putting out when people came out and who it is who created them can give us some insight into characters that may or may not necessarily have been like originally planted or there. But anyway, let's see what's going. So we have Captain Picard.
Engage.
I mean, maybe if he asks nicely. I mean, you have to figure out what to do with anyway, so legal name is Jean-Luc Picard. He was created by Gene Roddenberry and debuted in Star Trek The Next Generation, 1987. Absolutely hilarious to me that Jean-Luc has an English accent, but I'm assuming that
Cheryl Gray.
hot. I'm assuming though that by the time like, things are happening since you got like the Federation and stuff like that, some of the European borders might have like blended a little bit, right? So beyond that, we're not talking about European borders. We're talking about how Picard is like the bastion of integrity. Picard is like the person that you were telling us is like like kind of the main example that you point to as somebody who like, I'm not necessarily saying that T'Challa
You're
was,
hitting on.
I'm not saying necessarily saying that T'Challa was watching The Next Generation when it came on. I'm also not saying that T'Challa would not have watched it because that shit was amazing. Tell me I'm wrong.
No, you're not wrong.
Correct.
So, like, to put a little more context onto this is the second Star Trek show. Star Trek was very known for its sort of optimistic viewpoints on the universe, on people, and on trying to find positive solutions to problems. Our first captain from the original series was a lot more of an action hero, and Picard is instead a diplomat,
Mm.
an archaeologist. He's a scientist. He's a philosopher.
He's able to actually go to a planet where they pretty much only speak in memes and is able to figure out how it is he's able to kind of, not all of the memes, but he's able to more or less kind of create his own memes and things like that. And that is very cool. But there is also the episode where like, he has like a whole episode, a whole bunch of steadfastness about the number of lights that there are. So one of the questions that I have for you, like as we're like talking about Picard, is what is making him a good leader rather than just like kind of a stubborn man who thinks that he's really good at what he does?
So I think there's like two great examples. First one being his relationship with Lieutenant Data.
Okay.
Lieutenant Data is an artificial android. He's not human or any sort of other biological alien. There's one episode, there's two different actually episodes, where the humanity of Data and his created daughter later are both questioned.
Wait, are we talking about Measure of a Man in TNG? And
Yes.
then is there one in Picard that you're referencing as well?
No, the second one is, I think it's called Data's Daughter.
Okay. Is that in TNG or is
Yeah.
that in Oh, there's a lot of TNG that I kind of stopped watching once I noticed the number of white people who were playing Klingons because it was kind of blackfacey to me. But let's keep pushing, and I'm assuming that there's like stuff about Picard that I did miss over the course of time. So tell me, like, a lot of dudes have been convinced that they're like, the best, the best, the best, sir. Like, like how is he different from again, like
So he always worked for his team.
hmm,
This includes, like what I mentioned with Data, where he recognizes his humanity even when the legal system around him does not. Inclusivity, egalitarian. I would say the next one is his relationship with Wesley.
mhm.
You know, a huge fan favorite there.
Do not say "shut up, Wesley" just randomly. It's considered rude unless you're at like a Trek bar or something.
But Wesley makes several poor choices over the series.
What? Wesley?
Yeah,
This is the first that I'm hearing of
the
this.
biggest one when he's at the academy and him and a bunch of friends decided how to show off and cause a huge accident and people die. And he basically dresses him down and tells him, when you first came on this enterprise, I was mad at you for even being here, a child on my bridge.
Mm,
But you have since had been proving to me that you deserve to be here.
but
Now you've lost my respect in that regard. When your surrogate dad figure says that to you, they care about you, but they're also pretty heartbroken.
okay, listen. I would just want to make sure that we are all on the same page here, okay? Everybody is way more upset when somebody is disappointed than when they are mad, okay? We all know this, okay? I'm not mad, I'm disappointed is just like pretty much just like I can just go ahead and commit seppuku or whatever if you need me to just take care of that, right? Um
But like, so Picard isn't just telling people what to do, he's trying to show them how to be better.
Okay, so here's the question that I have then, and I want to like, move a little bit forward to the part where we are looking at I have not seen all of the Picard series. Also, shout out to Issa Briones. I also enjoy Ragtime. Completely separate conversation.
You can talk about ragtime, I'll stop for days.
Well, listen, unfortunately, my baby brother decided to have me see Ragtime, and as I said, whenever like, I first saw it, I thought that Make Them Hear You was an intermission number instead of an 11 o'clock number. And I don't need to sit there and go and wax poetic about this, okay? I do want to wax poetic about, though, is beyond the fact that, like, we have, like, like Jean-Luc. Okay, so, like, to a certain extent, he has focused, like, on the humanity of his people. It sounds kind of like
He's a philosopher king.
he is a walking, talking, like, embracer of DEI.
Sure, before it was cool.
I mean,
But
oh my god,
he's not perfect.
I'm not prepared for hipster Picard, okay? I'm not. I'm not prepared for hipster Picard, okay? Like, he's respecting, like, sentient life forms who happen to be, like, mechanically based before they were cool.
Yeah, well, yeah,
Anyway, alright, so,
he's making it cool.
you know what? We're gonna move away from TNG because this is
I
obviously
would
going to
add
be
one
something.
more point, because you're asking what keeps Picard from being a Geary stew.
Okay,
His relationship with the Borg. He gets nearly genocidal, if I recall.
I mean, he lives his most loquacious life for a
Oh,
minute, didn't he?
yeah. I mean, he was brutally traumatized by this experience. And like, there's this scene in First Contact
Mhm.
where he's yelling at Lily and breaking the little ships because he's freaking out so badly that he wants to just blow his own ship up. Like, that's some unhinged behavior.
I imagine, though, that Jean-Luc and then later Seven of Nine kind of just like being able to move on the other side of being cogs in the machines to a certain extent, like, because it's very easy to just sit there and be assimilated and be just a cog in the machine and keep, like, yeah, there's like evil that you may be perpetuating, but are you actively perpetuating it or are you just like filling out some paperwork, right? Yeah, there may be some teenagers who are like separated by sex at our detention facility. But my job is just to make sure that I sign the paperwork, saying which teenager is going to which direction and not like paying any attention to like the sex distribution of the guards. That's not what we're talking about.
Focus.
We're moving away from like, the whole like kind of war on the people who are literally here in America just trying to exist. And let's talk about moving away from the war on the people who exist.
One of the things I think makes Star Trek so interesting, questions about leadership, is that Starfleet is so many different functions in one organization.
Mm.
They are diplomats, they're explorers, they are researchers, and they function as the military and law enforcement. So they have cross purposes very frequently, and you have to watch the leaders figure out the decision that they're able to live with. And I think that Picard does that a lot. And I think that's what makes people gravitate to him because it does feel like he struggled at times.
Okay, but to a certain extent, I feel like it's worth noting that like the people who are on the Enterprise, they're not out there going and like the Green Lanterns are space cops, right? The Starfleet ships that are going out there, they do have some bit of like space cop thing, but I don't think that
Patrol the neutral zone?
any of the active ships though, like they might be there for like a bit of a tussle, but if there's a real thing, they are like going back and letting the rest of like Starfleet know and dealing with it. And there's a certain amount of it that I think that makes it easier for them to go and be diplomats if they are not. Look, again, like we all know that this podcast is Team ACAB, right? All right, 1312. Okay, like you cannot sit there and police what other people are doing and be entirely a good person. That's completely separate. But you have like these large like swaths of fields where people are trying to kind of just exist. You've got the prime directive of like where we don't interfere with people as they're going. So, as we're being very cosmic about things, there was another person that you said that you wanted to talk about, and podcast listeners, I'm just going to tell you, all right? Matthew has mentioned that he wants to talk about Delenn. I have no idea who this person is because I didn't watch Babylon 5. I have no idea who
Shame.
I have like tried to go and look on like various things to get an idea of who this person is, but I don't know. Okay, get the axes and the picks and the pitchforks. If you've got your bells, shame at me. That's cute, but make sure that you like tag me. Moving on. So after we have like the formal introduction for our next like person of focus, shall we say, I'm gonna need a really good but brief.
So bossy today.
I've met you. Description of who this person is. Okay. So their main, like the name that they're known by, Ambassador Delenn. Their legal name is Delenn. They were created by J. Michael Straczynski and debuted in Babylon 5 in 1994, which, by the way, was what? Oh my God, that was 32 years ago? I'm not stressing too deeply about it. I just want to make sure that we are all on the same page that it is okay if spoilers happen for a show that is, not only is it old enough to drink, but it could rent a car a while ago, okay? Spoilers are okay. So, who is this person?
So Delenn is a character
Oh my God, I was
played,
saying it wrong.
played, I thought, really movingly by Mira Furlan of Lost fame. And as the actress, she had fled the former Yugoslavia and was kind of persecuted. So
Note, podcast listeners, Balkanization is basically referring to a whole bunch of mishigas that happened in like the mid 90s where like the Balkans were having a lot of civil war and the regions were reshaped and there were a lot of places that had previously been one country that had split up into multiple ones. And I'm just saying, like, not to be too topical, but Balkanization has become a phrase for a reason. Anyway, please continue. I'm sorry.
she is, at the beginning of the show, a relatively young political leader in the religious caste, they call it. So she's not just a political figure, she's also a priest, which means that with all the interesting political authority that means.
Are we thinking priest kind of like in the way that like medieval England, like before?
Something closer to that, yes.
All right, cool.
Not
So
not like our current pope who has no like real political influence, more like a,
I will say
a
that the
pope
Pope
from
has it.
500 years ago.
All right, listen. I am not going to try to sit there and do math that far back, but I just want to point out the fact that, like, if we are within 500 years, another friend of ours who has known more about the entire British royal, like, lineage than even the official historians. Again, I've been knowing these people who are just, like, brilliant, right? But, we're not gonna focus on that part. Things have changed a lot over the course of time. Balkanization is bad, blah, 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 blah. So we're not looking at like a kind of Pope situation. We're looking at a person who is within like the religious caste, but not necessarily in that weird situation that we have with our like Catholics and Southern Baptists and things of that nature, right?
No, it's a pretty national religion for if it's science fiction, so they have limited space, so it's a pretty common religion,
Okay.
and the disagreements internally are between the different what they're called castes, and she represents the religious, but there's another one that's a big deal, that's the warrior caste,
Hmm.
and they're much more of the warmongers of this race, and Delenn is manipulated in a proxy war between two ancient powers, and she becomes at first one of the main faces for what they call themselves the side of light.
Okay. See now, That part the problem that I have is that, husband guy was very, very insistent that we watch The Wheel of Time, and I personally wanted to box most of the Children of Light. So, is this a similar kind of, like, Children of Light situation happening here, or is it a different group?
It's a difference in that they are presented at the beginning of the series as very much the good guys.
Mhm.
You find out as this proxy war becomes more obvious that there are no good guys.
Well, I mean, we also
No,
had the Red Aja pop up at the beginning of Wheel of Time. Husband guy really liked Wheel of Time, and he was really annoyed about the TV show. We're not talking about Wheel of Time, though. We're focusing, though, on Babylon 5. I just haven't seen Babylon 5, so I'm trying to figure out, like, metaphors that, similes, things like, I am familiar with. But there's a whole thing where, like, is it Delenn or Delon? How am I
Delenn.
Delenn, I've been pronouncing it wrong, the complete wrong way. I'm so sorry to Delenn. I'm sorry, Ambassador Delenn. But okay, I want to point out that like there's a whole thing where like you're like as you were trying to tell me about this person and like some of the stuff that was going on, like she had to apologize to another head of state for like not giving all of the
Yes.
information. Like what's happening with
Remember,
that
like I
one?
said, she's the leader of the forces of light, or at least one of them. The forces of light know that the enemy is coming, and they
Bum, bum,
don't
bum.
tell anyone. Delenn actively denies knowing anything, which prevents, which really leads to a near genocide of another race by these ancient powers called the Shadows.
I know that
And
everything
she
is
has to
not Wheel of
live with
Time, but
that
this does
guilt.
feel very much like the Amaryllin Seed fucking up.
No, because the Amaryllis seat knew more. Delenn is still how politically powerful she is. She's
Mm.
still fairly young, and
Okay.
she's being actively manipulated by much more powerful entities.
Okay, so to a certain extent, and again, like some of this is me being like the casual trying to figure out like the metaphor. So is she more along the lines of like early Queen Amidala, like Phantom Menace Amidala, where she has power, but like she's kind of getting stuck with it's like I have to make up for my mistakes?
No, it's later revealed that she's been being groomed for leadership by the absolute head of their government.
Okay.
Uh,
Let's Are there
and
slightly different
his
words that we
death
can
is what
use
starts her
given the
other major genocide.
I'm just saying, like, maybe we can use a slightly different word to, like, she's been, like, prepared for leadership, maybe, because grooming is a very specific word in our year,
The year of our Lord.
2026 is not really, like, the year to use grooming unless you're talking about a horse, honestly.
Fair enough.
But preparation is key. Preparations A through G are very useful.
But so there's this very moving scene
Mhm.
with her character and that one played by Andreas Katsulas, I think it's pronounced. He has to tell her that she is known all along.
Bum,
And
bum, ba, ba,
she
ba.
controls that. And she is like one of the major leaders of the alliances that they're slowly trying to form.
Wait, who has known all along about who known all along?
Delenn has known all along about this enemy that's coming, and they publicly deny it. make it sound like a crazy talk. They know full well it's coming, and they do it because they're afraid of losing the original initial battles if the enemy thinks they're ready for them.
Okay, so
So
again,
she
trying to figure out
lets
who is
these people die in order to protect the secret.
okay, so letting people die to protect a secret is often not considered. I know that, like, if we're going to sit there and like have like Mon Mothma and highlighting the many Bothans who have died to bring us information, so like,
This is way worse than that because they didn't consent to it, and it's way more people.
okay, so that's cool.
The
Is she able to like
other
kind of stop the
thing,
hemorrhaging at some point?
eventually, but the other thing she does, you find out later in the series, before the series started, is she was the deciding vote to murder all the humans.
Okay,
What they for them accidentally killing the major
bro,
Delenn's boss.
bro, I need you to sit there and give me a very clear and succinct thing about how it is that like the person who voted to like kill off the humans are like you are considering on the same level of Picard because quite frankly, Picard has not done like the kill off all the humans thing, and Dylan kind of you just said that they did, so I may be
Because
biased
once
because I
she
am in fact
realizes
a
her
human,
mistake,
but
she's the one who tries to who ends the war against the humans.
mhm.
She's the one who starts to realize that she's being manipulated by they call themselves the Vorlons. They look like literal angels.
um
They have been manipulating the Minbari and Delenn since the beginning of the show.
I just want to make sure that we are on the same page, that at no point is this podcast suggesting that what's happening with Babylon 5 is any version of a metaphor of, like, you have somebody who is manipulated into doing things because they think that one person is, like, maybe some sort of, like, biblical kind of figure or whatever, and, like, gets involved in wars or whatever that they probably have no business in. There's nothing topical about science fiction. That's crazy, right? But I do want to ask though, like,
So
there's a
she eventually reforms her entire society.
yeah.
She leads the effort in getting both of the two factions that were starting the proxy wars kicked out of the galaxy, like
The whole
kicked all the way
galaxy?
out of the galaxy,
That is not
so that the younger races can make their own.
I would like to point out as an aside that galaxies themselves are very, very big. Our little bit of like, solar system is on like the outside arm of the Milky Way
The
galaxy
unfashionable
itself.
end of nothing.
Right? Like we are kind of backwaters like on a galactic level. So if you get past where the Earth is, you are not going to have you a good time. Interstellar space is not cute, okay? But how am I supposed to be able to get to like the point though where I'm able to, I don't know, kick people out in the galaxy? Like how like what kind of leadership role is that if I
She has
have?
help.
I should certainly hope so because listen, like, like there's a lot of I can't necessarily get people to
But
consistently put the poop in the trash cans. How are they getting like the shenanigans out of the galaxies?
she's instrumental in like helping other races to resist. She's team freeing well, but she definitely starts in a dark place and has to learn to be better. And it's that journey I think of hers that's really interesting because
Okay,
she's presented as one of the good guys early on, and then you keep finding out these things that she did way past that are messed up, and she's been atoning for them ever since and trying to make other people's lives better.
okay. So again, we will talk about Steven Universe at some point in the future. We will have a deep dive, I promise. But it sounds to a certain extent that Delenn and Rose Quartz have similar
There's a
life
little bit
paths,
of
like
that,
to a certain extent of like, both of them started out as people who, in many ways, were doing various bits of genocides.
but you don't know that first.
We don't know that
You
at
meet
first.
the kinder version of them first, that they are better, that they are after they've grown. Then you learn how much worse that they've been.
Well, that's the reason why we didn't find out about volleyball until Steven Universe, what, Future?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, wow. I will say that, like, Rose Quartz becoming, like, again, within the Steven Universe, like, kind of situation, being able to have a position where even with some of the mess that she did, she was still able to be viewed overall as a good leader and, like, kind of revered as being a good person does I do have some questions, concerns, but like here's the thing, like Rose Quartz wanted to have her own colony. She wanted to be a part of things. But then whenever she saw the colony, she was just like, oh, wait, we're going to be tearing things up, right? And so to a certain extent, I'm wondering, like, how much of it is that, like, are we having, like, genuinely good leaders because they're genuinely good people? And they just, like, actually, like, they're genuinely good people who chose leadership? I don't know if that's the thing, because genuinely good people don't seem to choose leadership. In fact, here's what I'm going to use as my example. Um, Podcast listeners, we are millennials of a certain age, which means that we watched all of the Buffy series. We watched the movie when it first came out. We have a lot of theories and opinions, and we are also both very annoyed about the fact that Hulu canceled the reboot. You saw that, right? Yeah.
You told me.
Bullshit. Anyway, but there is an episode in Buffy, like the original, the TV show, right? Where we have Faith and Buffy do a whole body swap, and Faith somehow is able to go from, like, kind of mocking the leadership that Buffy, like, the leadership choices that Buffy had previously had, to a certain extent, like, realizing that they have teeth, right? Like, I guess I will
Definitely.
just I will describe it as almost the whole thing on, like, how demons run when a good man goes to war with, like, the whole doctor and everything, and why he has so goddamn many rules. But wait, hang on. I will wax poetic about things, but let me formally introduce who it is that we're speaking about, right? So, again, we're talking about the Slayer, but the very specific one is Faith Lehane. She was created by we don't talk about him. And she debuted in Buffy the Vampire Slayer in 1998 in season 3, right? So the episode that I'm, like, thinking about, like, that specific episode is, like, who are you? Faith is theoretically, like, the slayer of record, right? I mean, it is
Yes.
very much like a solitary role, one girl in all the world, and, like, being called when the last one dies. Like, most slayers don't really have active living role models in front of them. As you're, like, saying about, like, how people are becoming, like, good leaders and things like that, that in the episode that I'm thinking about, like, the Who Are You, where they have the body swap, like, Faith starts out with the whole, like, because it's wrong. It's wrong. I'll kick your ass. Like, she's being very, like, silly about it. But at the end of the episode, she's actually able to genuinely say, because it's wrong. And
We love personal growth.
we love personal growth, but how much of Faith's personal growth was because everybody kind of expected her to be good? Like, she was kind of slotted into a role where she
Very
didn't have
little.
a.
Like, Buffy attempted to kind of mentor her, but got frustrated. She only had the Watchers Council to guide her, so she wasn't really actually a good leader, and she wasn't a good person to start with.
Mm, active, accurate.
And yet, she eventually starts to make different choices. I
Mm.
mean, it takes the help of Buffy and Angel to really get her there.
And then a number of ass whoopings.
Eventually, she gets there.
That's true. I mean, she started out with, like, Mr. Trick and them. Not, I don't know if I would say that she's working for the vampires, but she was not quite living her most slayery life as she could be. And then, yeah, she did at the end of, like, that episode specifically, but at the end of, like, overall, like, she did grow into the arc in a way that I think that having the mentor available and not just, like, the notes of the watchers who are mostly just a bunch of, like, old dudes who are watching teenage girls a lot. Um, so I'm a little concerned about how many of the Watcher Diaries are about the litheness of the way that their slayers were doing things. But again, I feel like that makes it, like, continues the point though. Like, Faith is an unusual slayer in that she's able to have a bit of a role model. She moves from mocking kind of the rules and the style that the previous slayer has set up to really embracing them in a lot of the ways. And so, how much of being able to be a good leader is having a good, like, kind of role model, having a community that, like, pushes you
Leadership
towards
is
that?
absolutely a skill, and integrity is another skill. Neither of these are something you just have.
Mm,
They're something you've learned. And we watch Faith learn them. We watch Delenn learn them.
okay.
Patrick Stewart, or not Patrick, Captain Picard has like sort of hinted that he was far more trouble as a younger person.
I mean, wasn't that kind of the whole thing that, like, Kirk like, Kirk was actually more rambunctious after he got the captain's chair, and Picard was getting the captain's chair despite the rambunctiousness of his youth.
Yeah.
Listen, I want to make sure that we are on the same page, podcast listeners, okay? The same way that we don't believe that our parents have done shenanigans, our children don't believe that we have done shenanigans. So let's, let's continue to lie to ourselves.
I'll admit nothing.
Exactly. But, there's a certain amount of, like, Faith is able to grow within the leadership frame that she kind of is given by Buffy. It's kind of like how, like, if you have a vine or whatever, like, if you put, like, the trellises in there, they will grow up on it and become better.
Well, they'll take the shape of the trellis.
Which is, you can have, like, you could put the structure in place for somebody to lead things. Like, even if you have, like, this.
Usually it's an arch.
If we're, like, thinking, though, like, if we're getting, like, really future thought, and I'm talking not just, like, the Sapphires from Steven Universe, but full Dune, where, as an aside, I saw a poster for Dune 3 that came out pretty recently, and I gotta say, the Dune 3 poster was super interesting for me after seeing Misty Copeland be on point in front of the world, while Timothée Chalamet went home Oscars. I mean, look, even football players do ballet to get better at their craft, bro, okay?
Back on topic.
Sorry, I have opinions. It does technically count because there's a real question that I would like to ask, right, about Jessica from Dune, right? Okay, this is Paul Atreides' mom who decided that the 10,000 years of very, very, very specific breeding pairings that have happened could just, she could just wrap things up a generation early, right? I do have a bunch of sass about that lady, but let's go ahead and do her formal introduction, and then I can talk about my opinions later, and he can tell me why it is that he thinks that Lady Jessica actually counts as somebody who is a good leader. Lady Jessica. Jessica of House Atreides, okay, technically as a concubine. Her name situation was slightly different. Anyway, who was she created by? Frank Herbert. When did she debut? Dune, 1965. The whole premise of Dune is that messiahs really aren't all they're cracked up to be.
Correct. It's a deconstruction of the hero's journey.
I know. I realize that, though. I'm so sorry. Podcast listeners, I'm having a moment because I realized that I just, like, basically condensed 875,000 words into about 7 or 8 words, okay? Dune is very, very long, but ultimately, messiahs aren't all they're cracked up to be, right?
No
75,000 words.
excuses.
I'm still behind on Heated Rivalry, which AM is probably going to cuss me out about because this is episode 11, and he's told me on episode 1 of the season to go and watch this. So I am behind. I'm aware of this fact. Anyway, we're not talking about that. What we're talking about is Lady Jessica popped up Paul. Paul leads to Leto the Third. Leto the Third is like the person who sees and enacts the golden path. Spoilers for a 60-year-old book, I guess. But it feels to a certain extent like the way that when Doctor Strange gave away the time stone, but without the benefit of actually seeing those 14 million futures that he did. And just I am quite certain that both she and Paul's little sister were absolutely vital for ultimately getting humanity onto the golden path, but the extra 10,000 years of bullshit that we had to deal with God Emperor, Worm or whatever. 35. Oh, I'm sorry. My bad. But we have thousands of years of the humans going through it to get to this whole golden path thing, and that is it is difficult for me to find that as a kind of good leader. So what am I missing about Lady Jessica in this?
So Lady Jessica is a very high level, very highly trained specialist of a manipulative space cult who secretly rules the universe. This space cult is notorious for breeding absolute loyalty.
10,000 years of we have people that
Lady Jessica lives in a political system that hasn't really changed for almost 10,000 years in any large way.
which, as an aside,
Her
podcast
actions
listeners,
cause that to change.
it's worth noting that 10,000 years ago, we hadn't actually really gotten too into agriculture.
No, 10,000 years is an impossibly large amount.
It is crazy, okay? Jesus was 2,000 years ago, okay? Anyway, you were saying.
Fundamentally, Dune is a humanist story. That's why they get rid of the machines before you even start.
But Larry and
It's about
Jihad. Um,
s- asking the questions of what it means to be human.
mhm.
And Lady Jessica is the first character we really meet who does make a human choice. She chooses love over her space cult.
The first in 10,000 years is actually really fucked up when we think about it, but we're not going to talk about that part.
Well, I don't know if she was necessarily the first, but she was the first, like, high-born, highly placed.
Right, but that's the thing, like the understanding that I have from the way that things were set up is that basically she was not supposed to give birth to the quit-sex heteroc or whatever. That was supposed to be essentially her grandchild, and she's just like, what if instead of like, again, it's 10,000 years in the making. So like we have like the rapture kind of thing that like American Christians have been thinking of, X5. And she's just like, yeah, I cannot wait another 20 years. I'm bored. How can we put that together?
She did it out of love.
I mean, yeah, I mean, look,
Like, Jessica is probably the single most important character in Dune, because from that one choice, she causes the events that change the whole universe. She causes the events that justify and start to humanize the Bene Gesserit.
fair.
So they stop projecting love, only using control, but are instead like moving a little away from just being like terrifying space witches who are secretly, literally ruling the universe.
I mean, there's a lot of different variations of the Illuminati, but part of the thing that is, and again, like there's a certain amount of it that like is 875,000 words, okay? If I miss a specific section, please do not yell at me. I have a toddler and I still haven't watched Heated Rivalry, okay? Also, I would like to point out the fact that if you want to talk about like how we are not able to necessarily keep up with all of the things, Matthew just watched Sinners yesterday for the first time because I bullied him, okay? We can't all be caught up all the time. But a lot of what I'm hearing though is to a certain extent, like she was able to work through with love. She was able to like change everything with love. And on one hand, that seems really kind of depressing for the fact that like in 10,000 years, if each generation is about 20 years or so,
Oh no, they're longer because of the spice.
oh my God. Yeah. So like all of these generations involved in everything, and so many people were just like, I am going to just follow orders.
It's a very Machiavellian political system that she exists in.
The
An
only
absolute realpolitik.
the only thing that I'm gonna say is that I am super bad at realpolitik, or I am super bad at realpolitik, and if I was Oscar Isaac's concubine, I cannot guarantee that the IUD would be consistently working either, okay? Because that, I'm just saying, like, it's, kind of important, right? But also, like, even with that, like, there's also Jessica's, like, younger daughter who, goes through
That's really Jessica's biggest failure. She ends up personalities rattling inside her head.
they tamped it down a bit in the Dune movies, and I think that Dune 3, they may actually introduce this.
The sci-fi Dune series that portrays Leah very well. And she's a deeply, deeply tragic character. And Jessica fled when she was a child and kind of left Leah alone in an unstable political environment.
Like, there is dissociative identity disorder, and then there is every single person who's ever been in your bloodline, or I'm sorry, every single woman who's ever been in your bloodline ever. And quite frankly,
Well, it's unclear with Aaliyah whether she has all of the male memories or just some of them.
no, I didn't realize that she would have some of the male ones too. That's too
The
much.
Baron is what the person who gets into her head eventually.
You're right. I completely forgot about that. Listen, I have already struggled, podcast listeners, with the various times that I have realized that I have walked off with my mom's face. I am absolutely not prepared to have walked off with my mom's personality, like running my brain. And we're going to take a quick break. I'm going to sit there and remind myself that hospital corners are not a requirement, and we'll be back with our thrilling conclusion. Welcome back to our thrilling conclusion. So, to a certain extent, based on like the broad description of the people who have wielded power in various ways, because Picard is like a Starship Enterprise captain, but, it's a while before he's an admiral. Delenn is like an ambassador and everything, but it is also a while before, like, she's able to end a number of wars and things like that. Faith is a mess in like entirety of like the Buffy series, but by the time she like ports over to Angel, she's gotten herself together. And to a certain extent, I'm not going to give Jessica props for making sure that we get onto the golden path, but I'm not going to give her props for making sure that we get onto the golden path, because what the Bene Gesserit had in mind and what Jessica kind of executed are two very different like paths for humanity.
Yeah, one was outright domination.
So to a certain extent, the one that T'Chaka said is that a good man is going to have a difficult time actually being a good king? Or are we leaning more on the response that T'Challa had the second time that he hit the ancestral plane, where he basically cussed his daddy out, which, by the way, ethnically speaking, the way that he sat there and said, "You're wrong, all of you are wrong," he might as well have been telling his daddy, "Fuck you." All right? Please tell me I'm wrong, okay? Like, you're wrong, you were incorrect, all of you were wrong. Okay, so it was an ethnic cuss out, all right? Just please be aware of that. But again, like, are we falling on like the T'Chaka, just like, the world has been kind of shitty forever and being a good leader is going to kind of make you make bad choices? Or are we T'Challa, who is to a certain extent raised with you can be a good leader and make good choices kind of thing? Like, where are we going with this?
I think it has to be possible. I have to think it has to be possible. I like the way Frank Herbert, who wrote Dune, sort of talked about this question about. He said it's not that absolute power corrupts absolutely;
Hmm.
it's that power attracts the corruptible.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
And I think a lot of it is just that people who, there's a Douglas Adams line of anybody who has the ability to be made president should on no account be allowed to do the job.
So I'm not gonna lie, what I'm hearing is that the kind of people who do not want to be in leadership, who do not want power, are in many ways going to be the people who are going to be best with it, because of the fact that like they are not trying to amass power for themselves. They're just trying to sit there and kind of treat their leadership as a job. I would just like to make you aware of the fact that you end up with different cults at every place that you go to, because everybody finds you to be delightfully competent and aware of the things that you're doing. It is a sign that people leave bad managers. They don't leave like companies and such. And being a good manager and being able to kind of lead by being a good person feels like it's really like we're not getting necessarily even into the Epstein and WikiLeaks and whatever else files of stuff. Like, there is news that like Cesar Chavez, who is like, a major name in the labor rights movement, had two kids by Dolores Huerta, and she's had to keep that secret for a number of years. So, like, how do we trust that the people that we're putting in leadership are actually going to be good people?
I mean, there's no way to guarantee it. By its nature, power isolates, and isolated people start to make different decisions. That's why, when I was saying earlier, integrity as a skill is something that you can learn, but you can also lose.
Picard and Delenn and Jessica, to a certain extent, they have had like very real opportunities in which they could compromise whatever it is that they personally were feeling for the larger, like, kind of system. Like, Picard could have said that there were three lights. The Lion could have just sat there and like let a genocide happen. Even Faith could have sat there and been like continuing to sit there and mocked the whole leadership that Buffy had. And the whole, because it's wrong, I'll kick your ass.
You like doing that, don't you?
I do. Part of the thing is that, like, it's one thing to like crack jokes about like because it's wrong, and then the point where Faith is actually like saying it genuinely. And also, listen, I love Eliza. I love Eliza Down, but that was absolutely Sarah, and Sarah Michelle Gellar. You did your big one on that episode. Granted, it was like 30 years ago, so you probably aren't getting an Emmy for it anytime soon, but you should have gotten one. Anyway, it feels like a lot of things are just like when you have people who are relying on you to be good, but you have the actual connection to these people, it's a lot easier for you to be good. So like Picard and Delenn and Jessica, all of them had like the connections to like who it is that they were leading. I mean, like even with Jessica, like, like this is my own child that like I kind of have to deal with and stuff like that. The connection to the people is what seems to be making it real and giving the prospect for people to be good leaders. This is why nobody wants to be in leadership should be allowed, honestly, because the people like him who are just like, why are you putting me in charge of things? Fine, I will live my most competent life. And then can I please go do something else? They don't last in leadership for very long because they want to go do something fucking else after they have like set things right. So shifting away from questions of morality and leadership and things of that nature, why don't we talk about some of the things that can go onto your calendar for the week, right? How about we do that? Um, a few things that are happening this week in your comics multiverse. So on March 20th, we have the birthday of Dick Grayson, aka Robin or Nightwing. So like the first Robin, because AM will absolutely remind you of the sheer number of them that there are. We also have on March 21st, Ralph Dibny, the elongated man. That is his birthday. Let's try to make sure that we put some respect on both his name and his wife Sue's name. So don't get cussed out. Now, here's where it is that I'm about to sit there and make sure that you don't get cussed out. March 22nd is the official birthday of Princess Diana of Themyscira. That's right. Wonder Woman's birthday is coming up. It's March 22nd, so get ready, okay? That is an Aries lady, and if you do not get punched in the face by her, it is because she has been able to have a whole bunch of other stuff that made her chill out a little bit. Also, March 24th, we have the release of Hero for Hire, Luke Cage, and that was very cool, March 1972. Listeners, we have come to the end of our podcast. I know. How is it over so soon? Well, good news. Our next episode will be coming out next week. You're also more than welcome to listen to this episode again if that's not fast enough. Or you can join our Patreon.com/Up Your Nerd Cred Pod. And that's where you can get like solo scripts, behind the scenes footage, whatever kind of peanut galleries happen to be hanging out while we are doing things, right?
Nerd cred takes time to build.
But it just kind of sucks that the best leaders are usually the folks who don't want to be in charge of other people. It's the main reason why he refuses to be a politician. I've told him that I would be his chief of staff, and he won't do it. Anyway, so this is the time to mention, though, completely separately, that we are on Instagram, we're on Apple, we're on Spotify, we're on YouTube. We're working on expanding our reach. If you like the episode, make sure to rate, review, and subscribe, especially if you're trying to up your nerd cred. Now, I'm going to borrow a little bit from the Scam Goddess podcast, Lacey Mosley, and ask our guest where he may want to be found, because I am not sure that you have any public-facing social media.
Negative.
Yeah.
On Halloween, AM was scouring Instagram trying to find me, so no luck.
Well, you can follow the podcast in general on Up Your Nerd Cred Pod. If you're looking for me across platforms, I'm at CiCi Davis. And realistically speaking, if you have any continuity errors or very good fan art, the ones that you should send it to are actually at AMDS Art. If you do have a question that you would like us to discuss, that you can up your nerd cred, make sure you like, subscribe, leave comments, and if we pick your question, we'll shout you out in the discussion segment. Again, we've launched the Patreon. Make sure you follow the link in the show notes to join it. Also, feel free to get your friends to like and subscribe to, and your family and the coworkers that you trust not to be listening to the weird about listening to the same podcast as you. And perhaps, is there somebody at the movie theaters that you want to see?
And everybody.